Today we are reviewing the Elemental Maze by Casper the Pancake. The instructions here are to grab coins, avoid the pattern popping up every now and then, pass room gets faster, there's a world record involved, wants this project to be hearted, sure thing, I'll give one, and don't anybody copy this. Okay, let's take a look at this. First things first, take a peek at the code. And my first instinct here is that there are a lot of sprites and code here for a maze game, but let's check this out. Nice rotating title, rotating start button. Let's take a look at the gameplay over here. Coins to collect. Player is a little bit small, kind of hard to see. But the controls seem to work smoothly enough with the arrow keys. I might also consider trying to have the player character follow the mouse if I wanted it to be a little bit smoother and easier to control. And the other thing I'm starting to notice is that it doesn't look like this pattern follows me. There is just a random pattern that pops up on the screen, and if I avoid it when it turns blue, it looks like, then I don't take damage. But if I wait the entire 2 seconds for it to turn blue, then I get damaged. I think in games, if you're going to put a kind of danger mechanic, you're going to want to have to make some way that the player is going to have to interact with it. I like that pattern a lot better than the other ones. Let's take a look at the settings over here. And it looks like the players themselves will control the variable sliders, and I'm not so sure about using this as an option screen, but it's an interesting idea. Here's the maze updated with the options that we selected. New patterns are popping up, and the player character is a lot harder to see on this background. Still, it's pretty interesting to have a settings menu and be able to update the game. There are a lot of coins. Okay, that's enough of the gameplay. It's time to take a look at the code. And my plan here is that I'm going to remix this so I can mess around with it and test out what everything does. Okay, what I'm going to attempt to do first is to organize the code, and I'm going to speed this up a lot because I want the similar functions to be next to each other so I can evaluate what is happening in the code at different points in time. So we're just going to continue the time lapse here while I organize the code so I can read it better.
6.5 hours later.
Wow, there is a lot going on in this player sprite. Okay, when we start the project, we initialize some variables. There's a CLUD variable for world record over here. Looking at the player's survival time, pressing the letter S to change your costume. Not the most intuitive, I think. When you're touching the blue color, then you take damage, you broadcast that. These hand-drawn player characters are pretty cute. That's nicely done. There's initialization of some variables over here, and oh my goodness, there's so many variables. There's some duplication when you're hiding variables. Over here we set up the conditionals for the CLUD variables and some of the other variables. One of the big benefits of modularizing is that you have an organization and it's easier to figure out what's happening to your variables when and where. Over here again is that infinite lives usable by the slider in the options menu, and setting the health to 1000 if they choose to be invincible. I'm not sure of the need for redundancy over here in terms of the movement script, but I think the main point is that it works in the end, and it works similar. This has a similar functionality to some other movement scripts that I've seen, where you change the Y by a variable and then you change the X by a variable. I'm not quite sure of the intention for this script over here, but we're going to move on to the maze. which is ridiculously simple compared to the player sprite. Here we're looking at the coin sprite, and it's also kind of messy, so I'm going to right click and clean this up so we can read this in a linear fashion. So the coins are meant to disappear when the player dies. When you initialize, you set this died variable to no. We generate coins and hearts. And there's a module. Nice. Okay, so when I'm not dead, I'm going to be generating random positions for this heart or the coin according to clones of costumes. Here I notice that the coins need to generate before the game can start. Now let's look at the patterns, which are the main game mechanic, things that are going to damage us. First step is to clean up the blocks so I can read this in a linear fashion. What is this? It looks to be some kind of randomization engine working off of lists. There's 4 lists, and let's take a look at these lists. And it seems that they are populated with numbers less than 30, a random assortment. There's even a little helper function for the randomization engine. So this randomization engine is kind of bloated, but it is pretty creative, and I'm sure that if we worked with the idea for a little bit, we could make something pretty amazing. Here's a sprite to manage the music, and I'm not sure why we need the volume over here to be a variable, but I guess that's so that you can use it as a slider. Generally speaking, I like for things to be less complicated when possible. So instead of having these variables to manage all of the different options, I think I would like to have something clickable, maybe something that directly does it with coding. Over here was a really cool effect for the title screen. I'm going to borrow some of this code. This is an example of parallelism. You have 2 scripts that are doing something at the same time for the start buttons and the title screen. This code over here kind of confuses me. I'm not sure why there's so many need to recheck if the mouse pointer is being touched. Let's go ahead and move on to the next script. +1, -1. I liked this effect in the game, but I didn't get a whole lot of chances to see the -1 because it was too easy to avoid the damage. There's pretty simple scripts for the rest of the game, and knowing what we know now, let's go back through the game. Overall, I like that there's a lot of interesting ideas that go into this game and that it works. So in the next part of this video, we're going to take a look at other examples of maze games. See you in part 2. Because remixing from the community is one of the greatest ways to learn different methods to accomplish your goals.